Way back at the turn of the 14th century, right in the heart of a kingdom that was falling apart, one man ruled as a king in everything but name. His name was Matúš Čák of Trenčín, and his story, well, it really makes you wonder who gets to write history.
So, picture this imposing fortress. This was basically his throne of stone. From here, he was known as the Lord of the Va and the Tatras. His name was a big deal, and it echoed with power, and for a lot of people, with fear, all across the lands that would one day be Slovakia. He was a symbol of pure, unbreakable will.
But this is the big question, right? The one historians are still wrestling with. Was this guy some kind of early Slovak national hero, a unifier for his people? Or was he simply a power-hungry, ruthless oligarch who saw a chaotic world and took advantage of it for his own gain? Let's dig in and unpack the legend.
Okay, so let's start with this idea of him as the uncrowned king. To really get a handle on the man, you have to look at the stories people told about him. And you know what's crazy? Depending on who was doing the writing, you get two completely different people.
And wow, the difference is just night and day. On one hand, you've got Latin and German sources calling him a fearless and confident duke. Sounds pretty good, right? But then you look at the official Hungarian chronicles, and suddenly he's a scoundrel and a disobedient oligarch, a complete rogue. So which one was it? Hero or rogue? The answer, as it turns out, starts in the world that created him. So, to understand a guy like Matúš Čák, you have to understand the world that forged him. And this was not a time of peace and stability. No, this was an age of absolute anarchy.
The fancy term for it is feudal anarchy. But what does that actually mean? Well, think about it. The king dies in 1301, and with him, the entire royal line. Poof, gone. The central power of the Kingdom of Hungary just crumbles. And that creates this massive power vacuum. And who steps in to fill it? Guys exactly like Matúš. Powerful nobles who start carving out their own little kingdoms.
You know, he wasn't born a rebel. Matúš Čák, born around 1260, came from a seriously powerful family. His own dad, Peter, was the Palatine of Hungary. That's like the highest office in the entire kingdom. So Matúš inherited lands, castles, the works. But here's the crucial part. Even though he was a Hungarian noble, he grew up in the Slovak lands of what was then called Upper Hungary. And that really shaped who he became.
And this is where the story gets really ironic. You see this castle, Trenčín, his legendary fortress? It was a gift from the king. He earned it back in 1291 for fighting for the crown, for helping recapture Bratislava. So his reward for loyalty was the very same fortress he would later use to defy the entire monarchy.
All right, so now he's got the lands, the titles, this incredible fortress. Matúš Čák doesn't just sit back and count his money. No, he goes and builds his own, completely independent state.
Just take a look at this map from around 1310. See that whole area in pink? That's his turf, the land of Matúš. It's huge. He didn't just control a castle. He controlled a massive piece of territory that literally split the Kingdom of Hungary in two. In this domain, he was the absolute master.
And how did he control it all? With castles. At the height of his power, he held more than 50 of them. 50 fortified strongholds. I mean, think about that. In an age where taking just one castle was a massive military campaign, this number is just staggering.
And this wasn't just brute force. He established a parallel state. He had his very own court at Trenčín, modeled directly on the royal one. He appointed his own Palatine, again, the highest official in the land. He had his own tax collectors and local governors. From his castle, he ruled as if he were the king.
And yeah, he had the muscle to back it all up. He could raise an army of 4,500 men. Now, by the standards of the 14th century, that wasn't just a small group of guards, that was a serious army, capable of challenging any force the actual king could field against him.
Okay, so you can see where this is all going, right? A kingdom divided can't stand. And a new, strong king, Charles Robert of Anjou, was determined to reunite the realm. That meant a collision with his most powerful rival was absolutely inevitable. And things escalated quickly. In 1309, Matúš actually sent messengers to the king, demanding his lands be recognized as their own separate principality. The king, of course, refused. So 2 years later, Matúš's forces got so bold they invaded the capital city Buda and forced the entire royal court to flee. This was open warfare.
And it all came to a head right here, at the Battle of Rozgoni in 1312.
This was the decisive showdown between the king's forces and the combined armies of the oligarchs. Now, Matúš himself wasn't there, but his closest allies were. It was a bloody, brutal affair that was going to change the course of the whole kingdom.
The king was victorious. The oligarchs were crushed. But here's the twist. Matúš's own troops arrived too late to even join the battle. So while his allies were defeated, breaking the back of the oligarchy across the kingdom, Matúš himself and his core domain remained untouched and defiant.
So he survived the war, but who was Matúš Čák beyond the battlefield? While the historical sources reveal a surprisingly complex and even cultured picture of this hardened warlord.
He inherited Trenčín Castle, and it's here that we see a totally different side of him. The chroniclers tell us he had a jovial character and was a passionate hunter, even introducing rare beasts to his lands just for the sport of it.
And this is where the picture gets truly fascinating. This ruthless warlord was a man of high culture. He loved finely carved, gilded furniture. He owned a library with texts in multiple languages, including Slovak. And most surprising of all, he wrote his own poetry in Latin.
In the end, after all the battles, all the rebellions and defiance, the king never defeated him. Matúš Čák died of natural causes in his fortress at Trenčín on March 18, 1321. He ruled his domain independently until his very last breath.
After his death, the king's army finally swarmed his lands and took his castles. As one source puts it so perfectly, his estates were defeated, but he was not. The man himself died unbowed and unconquered.
His legacy was so immense that for almost 2 centuries, people still called Western Slovakia the land of Matúš. Much, much later, in the 19th century, Slovak national romanticists would rediscover him and transform this ruthless oligarch into a national hero, a symbol of Slavic defiance.
Which leaves us with one final question. Matúš Čák was a product of his violent time, and he was absolutely acting for his own power. But history and the needs of a nation remembered him as something else entirely. It makes you wonder, who gets to be a hero, and how is a nation's story truly written?